My name is Neshama Abraham. I live here in Boulder. And I started the initiative for the 5-year moratorium that we won with about 80% of our voters here in Boulder, to have a 5-year break in fracking. Yes, thank you everyone for voting for it. I'll bet everyone here did. And I was also on the team that worked with the Boulder County Commissioners, and we have a 18-month moratorium. And by the way, that ends on January 1st of 2015, so we're going to talk about that. I wanted to first ask you all if you would just, and this is a bit on the sort of mystical side, but think about a body of water that you have an actual connection to. Could be a stream or a lake or Wonderland Lake or just any place that you've gone in nature that really moves you. And if you were to ask that body of water if it would be happy to be removed from its natural flow, have a bunch of chemicals injected into it, sent down a deep pit, dark, full of diesel oil, and then it shocks, it knocks, it fractures the rock, and then a bunch of things that are down there that have been down there for tens of thousands of years come up, volatile organic compounds. This, if you were that body of water, and you went through that process, and then you further got, then with all these chemicals, you wouldn't even really be water anymore. And then you were trucked to another location, and you were injected a mile or two underneath the ground, hidden forever. Like you would never see the light of day again. You would never flow. You would never do any good for insects or birds or people. What would that body of water say? Would it want that? I mean, like, is it what? Literally, I just wonder what do you get as a hit when you? Does any voice come through for you on that when you think of that? Is it a guttural no, like please no, don't do that? Well, that's what happened for me when I got into this. I remember actually being at a kind of a ritual where there was a whole it was like a dance for the water, and I got that the water as its own voice in nature, as its own being on this planet, doesn't want to be used that way. It doesn't want to be fracked. And I realized that as a human being, as someone who I could go and speak to Boulder County Commissioners, and I could speak to Boulder City Council members, and I could talk to neighbors, and I was going to stand up for the water. I was going to speak for the water. So that's what I did. Yeah. And I had never done anything like this before. I mean, for a living, I have a public relations and marketing firm. I had not done politics. I didn't know the power of citizen action, but it's very strong. And we are actually at this point the only city, Boulder is, that hasn't been sued by COGA. So today, we are, this is what this panel's about. This is about fracking and water use, and we're going to talk about the fracking process. We're going to talk about the impacts on the water, on health, on air quality. We have 2 guest speakers. I'm going to introduce both. Phil is going to speak first, then Wes. We have actually a surprise TV clip which came out yesterday, which is a really significant finding, so we're going to show that. And then we're going to have a Q&A session, so please hold your questions, because it actually makes it a lot easier for Peter, our videographer, if our speakers can go all the way through their presentations. So we'll have 15 or 20 minutes for that. And then we've got a couple of announcements for you, because there's some important things that are happening in the next week that are all really impactful that we could do something about. So we're going to have a couple of different people who are in the audience speak about them. So that'll be at the end in terms of announcements. Does that sound good? Thank you. Okay. So our first speaker I'm going to introduce is Phil Doe. And Phil has worked for the U.S. Federal government for 20 years. He worked for the Department of Interior, and he's a writer. And he became an expert on water law and wrote an environmental impact statement in 1981. That was the definitive largest ever produced by the Department of Interior about water issues, and recognized that there was some corruption that happens around water use and decided to do something about it. So he actually went on 60 Minutes, and he was the first person to actually talk about those issues. He has since co-formed Be the Change, where he and Wes are co-directors, and they're going to talk about the public trust doctrine is one of our pieces in this presentation. But Phil has written numerous articles and is an expert on this subject. So here you go.
I'd like to start off by reminding you that Lauren Isley said that if there's any mystery in this world, the mystery's in water. That's a fact lost on all our politicians, and it's certainly lost on the oil and gas industry. Less than 1%, okay. Less than 1% of the water in the world is fresh water that we have access to. So keep that in mind as I go through this and the way that we're using our water lavishly to mine something that is infinitely less valuable and destroying at the same time. Okay, let me give you some background. In this state, we have about 58,000 oil and gas wells. The new technology, and it's brand new technology, you'll hear that it's been around forever, that fracking is an old technology. It isn't, it's brand new. The first productive well was probably about 2003. We got into it about 4 or 5 years ago, and we're going hell-bent for leather. Over half the wells we're doing now are horizontally fracked. Wes will tell you what that process is, but it uses a tremendous amount of water, a tremendous amount, about 5 million gallons per well. And there was, well, that's just one frack. They just do it once. We don't know if they're going to come back and frack again, but if they come back and frack again to keep production up, it'll take more water. There, okay, all right. So the first slide, I don't know what it is, but we'll find out in a second. I wanted to give you some idea what fracking really looks like. This is an overhead in Greeley. This has been approved by the state, and the state says we have the strongest rules in the world on fracking. But I would remind you, this is in the right in the middle of the city of Greeley. These are the proposed wells, 33 of them, 37. The setbacks are supposed to be 500 feet. They got these through before the new setback rules were in place. So they're supposed to be 300. But as you can see, there are homes, some are only 50 feet away from the boundary of this. The trouble is that the frackers, the oil and gas industry, can buy exceptions, and they often do. The interesting thing about this is these homes are only about 300 feet away. These are all multiple home dwellings. 33, and I told you, 33 of them, 5 million gallons each. I'll give you some idea of what that means in truck traffic. Right over here is Northern Colorado University. All the land under Northern Colorado was leased to the oil and gas industry by Tom Norton's wife, who used to be president of the state senate, and she's president of the university thanks to Bill Owens. They owe their livelihood to Bill Owens. But it was done without competitive bid, which is a requirement of state law. It's supposed to go through the school board because that's where the money goes, but they did it non-competitively. But think about the enormity of this. And these 5 towns that have fought this, they do not want this in their city. I don't understand why. I mean, what could be wrong with that? They approved another one. The state approved another one about the same time for 67 wells, right in the middle of town. Now, and the governor claims that we have no right to object, that it meets the standards and those strict rules that we've made in this state for governing the oil and gas industry. I mean, that's idiocy. I mean, there is no way. Okay, next one. That's the background. Okay. This is for 4 wells, and this is traffic. And this is the traffic that would be coming into your city. Now, normally what they have, if they're going to do one section, 640 acres, the spacing's about, they go down and out, so they'll be about 500 feet apart. So that, normally, for a section, they'll have 8 wells. So you can just double this. But these are the truck trips. And we're not talking about small stuff here. I mean, the water trucks. The water trucks themselves weigh 80,000 pounds. That's the limit. So you're talking about 4,000 of those. And that's for 4 wells. So double this, because that's on a section, that's about what you'd have. And then you have annual production trips per pad. And that's when they come in and get the product. Or the wastewater. And it's not really water, we don't know what it is. The chemical byproduct. They claim, well, this won't really happen because we'll pipe it out. And we'll pipe it in. Well, maybe so, maybe no. But it gives you it gives you the size of the enterprise. There's a fellow up at CSU, head of the climate science department, and he was in a past life a field geologist for the oil and gas industry. And he said in an open forum in Fort Collins that this was a heavy industrial activity that should be allowed in no city. That's simply been lost on our politicians. I mean, they're working day and night down there right now to make sure that the oil and gas industry can come into our cities. Next slide, please. I've talked about this. At 8 wells, at 5 million gallons apiece, that's 120 acre feet. That's enough water for 1,200 people. The way we plan, the way as a planner for the Bureau of Reclamation, it would have been enough water for 1,200 people. But since they destroy it all, they don't use 50%, they use it all. It's actually enough water for 2,400 people, as we would normally plan. It's simply gone. It's injected into these deep wells, these class 2 wells. That's what we do with it. We bury it. We put it out of sight in the hope that it'll never get into our groundwater. That's what we're doing. Were you all aware of that this is going on? Do you understand what we're doing to ourselves? I mean, it's criminal enterprise, what it is. Okay, next one. I think this is probably an aspect of fracking that has been overlooked and we need to really concentrate on. There are a lot of class 2 wells in the state, and Wes might talk a little bit about how they came into being. They're approved by EPA, but there's very little oversight. I told you that it's 5 million gallons per each well. Well, probably in most cases half of that comes back, contaminated, unexamined, and is put into these wells. And it continues to flow back over the life of the productive life of that well. So we have no idea how many trillions of gallons of waste material, the chemistry of which we know nothing about, is being injected into the earth. In addition to that, if that weren't bad enough, EPA, Region 8, in the 6-state area, which they're responsible for, have allowed 184 exemptions where the industry actually injects their poison into usable groundwater. They allow this because on 2 principles. It'd be uneconomic to develop, and it's not being used. Well, let me tell you, Mexico City is out of water. They're drilling over a mile deep for a potable water supply. What in the hell are we doing? We're foreclosing on our future. We're making this groundwater unavailable. The chance is that all these class 2 wells will leak in time, contaminating our groundwater. It shouldn't be allowed at all. It's one of the reasons that oil and gas is cheaper than renewables, because we don't assess the costs. We allow them to escape the costs, and they become our costs. That's what's happening, pure and simple. If this were a RCRA waste, if they had to clean it up, oil and gas would be out of business. And the EPA was supposed to make it a RCRA waste, but they didn't. The pressure was so great that they didn't do it, and they never have. So it is simply considered non-toxic waste without even knowing what's in it. Next slide. It's a big deal for me. I think people have the right to defend their home. And this is what our Constitution says about that. It says we have that right. It's absolute. It's an absolute right. You can't take it away from us without changing the Constitution. Yet, the governor, the oil and gas industry, the legislature, bless their cotton-picking hearts, all those people have said we don't have this right. And they passed a statute that says we don't, that we're preempted from doing this. But this is our constitutional right. This is going to be a big fight, a very big fight before it's all over. Next one. Do you want me to talk about this now? Okay. I've worked on initiatives a lot. I've never been any successful. And let me tell you, the next time one of your Democratic legislators say that the initiative process is too easy, just tell them they don't know what the hell they're talking about. And it is our first right. And don't let them take it away from you. It's our first right of legislation. The reason we have it was we can't trust the legislature, and if we can't trust them, we can do this. So this is an initiative that we've been working at Be the Change. And we've kept a very low profile because Wes and I in particular spent a lot of time trying to organize the grassroots to speak for themselves on home rule. But this could be transforming. It's pretty simple. It just says the people of Colorado have an inalienable right to clean air, clean water, and the preservation of the environment. And a lot of states have a public trust doctrine, but it doesn't have teeth in it, so the government simply ignores it. This has teeth in it. It establishes the state as trustee, and science has to be the sole basis for making a decision about use, whether it has to do with our air, our water, or our land. This puts the oil and gas business people out of business as far as the way they presently work. They could no longer corrupt our groundwater and spew, and Wes will talk about this, tons of crap into the air, willy-nilly, without control. It would also, perhaps, change water appropriations. In other words, the first principle is the river has to be protected, and there has to be a minimal level of protection. And if you've taken too much out of that river, like the Fraser River, you have to put it back. It's in our Constitution, because the river comes first. I'm going over to Gunnison to talk about this, and Greg Hobbs is going to be there. It ought to be fun. The state can seek damages for mediation. If you do damages to the environment, the state must seek remediation, and it uses that money to help restore what has been damaged. It also gives the citizens the direct right to enforce what is theirs. You can go into court if you don't think the government's doing its job, and so declare. It turns the tables on the way we've always done things. If you want to use my water, because it is ours under the state constitution, it belongs to all of us collectively, it doesn't belong to the state, it belongs to us, then you have to demonstrate that you are not going to do substantial harm to that resource. And the cost is yours. It's not our cost. Forever and ever and ever, the public has had to pay for somebody else's designs. We need to change that. We absolutely have to change it. And finally, it'd be a criminal offense to manipulate science for your own enrichment. In other words, to lie about the results. Whoop-de-doo. Well, we had a lot of help. We had do I have any time? We had a lot of help from people at University of Oregon Law School. I have a friend, Hap Dunning, who's probably the guru on public trust. It teaches at the University of California, Davis. And, you know, I wrote it first, and they told me it wasn't any good, and I'm used to that. Any writer is good first time around. So we've worked on this, and we're ready to go. It's before the Supreme Court. It's past the Secretary of State. We could literally start getting signatures, but I've been through this so many times that we're not going to do it unless we have a war chest. And we're trying to get some big money in California interested. I don't know if we'll be successful, but you know, we're not going to start out with any less than $200,000. We had some wonderful people here in Boulder 2 years ago that helped me with the water initiative. It just takes too much money, and we burn out too many people if we have to rely solely on volunteers. And it's hard. I mean, you need over 100,000 signatures, maybe 120. Oh, it's BC, oh yeah, okay.
It's right here.
It's up on the poster behind you.
Oh, yeah. No, that's not it.
It is btc-usa.net.
Yeah.
www, here, Phil, you say it.
Okay, it's www.btc, where is it? USA.net. Okay, it's www.btc.usa.net. Yeah, I think that's right.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you, Phil.
Net. Oh, it's a dot, though, I think. It is a dash? Oh, well, that shows you what I know. I did get through these slides. I think that's pretty good for me. I don't usually use slides. But, you know, spread the word on this. Our concern is we don't want to clash with the grassroots and on these efforts on local control. And if we don't get the money, I tell you what, until I die, we will work on this.
So while the...
Yes.
I have a question. You mentioned that it was 5 million gallons to frack it. Well, what period of time do they use that 5 million gallons over?
What-
Year, month?
Oh, no, they're out there maybe for 2 or 3 months.
2 or 3 months?
It's getting shorter and shorter and shorter. But they don't usually do all 8 wells at once. They usually do, you know, maybe 2 or 3, and then they'll come back and do them again. So you're never rid of these fools. I mean, they're there forever. But it'll be incremental. That's pretty right, isn't it, Wes?
I'm going to introduce Wes, and I just want to make sure everybody got that website. Phil, thank you.
Yeah, sure.
For Be the Change, it's www.btc-usa.net. btc-usa.net. Okay.
I do know more than my website. A little more.
It's good to spread out the technical expertise. And please hold questions, because I promise we will make time for that. My pleasure now to introduce Wes Wilson. Wes has a degree in geological engineering. He has a master's in water resource administration. He, before college or right after college, when did you work for the Army?
Before.
Before college. So are you volunteered?
No, back then you had to go. It was called the draft.
Oh, right. So my father volunteered. Okay. Well, he was in the draft, and he was a conscientious objector. He was the second officer in the U.S. Army to become a conscientious objector. Honorably discharged, 1974. Wes worked for the EPA, U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, from 1974 to 2010. And he won numerous awards. They were called the Bronze Medal. He led the EPA in all kinds of investigations and analysis. He then became someone who realized that there was a problem with the EPA, and realized that it wasn't going to work to continue to work for them, even though he knew from the inside. Wes was in the movie Gasland, the documentary by Josh Fox, and has taken his considerable expertise about geology and water, and with Phil Doe formed Be the Change. So, you know, it's when we can do that, when we can take our expertise and then move it into environmental action, that is among the most powerful things one can do with a life. So, my pleasure to introduce Wes Wilson.
Well, let me go through some fundamentals. I always think that it's good to review some fundamentals about what we know about fracking. Can you hear me back there? Okay, first slide. It's important to get across that the ability to go down and horizontally drill, the industry's after oil and gas that didn't leave the rock it formed in. It's important to know because in the previous century, the action was in where the oil and gas was trapped. The oil and gas had moved up from the rock it formed in and got into some kind of trap, like I'm showing here, an anticline. And when that happened, you would get gas, oil, and water, particularly brine. So the history of these Class II wells that Phil was mentioning was the industry had brine right at the bottom of its production, and it would re-inject into the same location. Brine that came out of the ground was going back into the ground in the same location. Things have changed radically this century. No longer, these traps, there's so few of them left, they've been overexploited. The industry has come up with this ingenious technology, you gotta face it, it's pretty ingenious, of controlling that well exactly horizontally through the rock, and then putting a small dynamite charge down there so they can open up the pipes. That dynamite is not a big charge, it only goes 5 or 6 feet. And then they come in with the big machines, 8,000, 10,000 horsepower engines, prepare their recipe on top, which is about 0.5% toxic, and mostly it's water, gar gum, and sand. What's the sand doing in there? The sand is put down there so once they crack the rock, the sand goes back with the recipe, and once they lower the pressure, the sand stays back in the rock, keeps the rock open, just that little gap, enough for gas and oil to flow. So, 2 things you get from this. There's rarely a dry well. They're going to where the oil didn't leave the rock. That makes a huge host of geologic formations available on this planet that weren't available before. And the water that they put down there, the toxic water they put down there, and the water that they get back, they don't want it in that same formation. They want the gas to keep flowing, so they have to dispose of it in another set of wells, even deeper. Next slide. When you look at what's happening in the United States, we've got 31 states now exploiting shale or tight sands using this horizontal and fracking technique. This map is so old, it doesn't even show the big play here in Colorado. Next slide, Will. I was just going to show you briefly what that looks like worldwide. Right now, the United States dominates this technology. China is purchasing it. We haven't seen it elsewhere. A little bit in Poland, a little bit in England, some coal bed methane in Australia. But there is a lot of geosynclinal basins now made available through this technique, where otherwise we wouldn't have had oil available like Saudi Arabia does in these traps. Next slide. Here in Colorado, just since 2009, boy, they hit the mother lode. They hit really good quality oil in the Niobrara with this horizontal drilling technique. The first well went in, called the Jake well, and it hit 50,000 barrels in the first 90 days, and there was euphoria. There was the emptying of pockets out of Europe. There was huge amount of cash flow into Colorado because this is a widespread formation. Each well produces, so far, enough oil to pay for the price of the well. So the industry is so greedy to get it out so quickly. They're not waiting to develop the gas. They're burning it off in large amounts. And they're not waiting for pipelines, they're shipping it out of the state on railroad now. How many of you are seeing the railroad cars? 2 or 3, no? You're not? I mean, I always used to see the big coal cars coming from Wyoming down through Denver, but now we're starting to see unit trains of oil being shipped out of the state. Next slide. Now here in Colorado, largely we are protected somewhat by this aquifer formation being down below a deep shale called the Paiss Shale, and the aquifers that are being used on the Front Range are much higher. Of course, for cities like Boulder, Denver, clever enough to steal water from the other side, clever enough to get water out of our snowpack, those communities aren't so vulnerable to the effects of fracking. Where we see the effects of fracking on groundwater is where people use groundwater. Let me just take you through a couple studies. Duke University in Pennsylvania, they found much higher methane concentration in domestic wells if they were close to a fracking well. Tony Ingraffio of Cornell put out really pivotal information that shows from the industry that about 7% of the wells fail right from the beginning. They don't have adequate plumbing. They're not separated from the groundwater. And over time, the same companies are reporting 60% of their wells fail. That is, natural gas that's overpressured from the deep formations it comes from is coming back into our groundwater formations. There was a big event here in November '07. Petroglyph was drilling for coal bed methane near the little town of Levita. This is between Levita and Walsenburg. And about 20 or 30 homes showed up pretty quickly with high methane concentration in the house, enough so that 2 well houses blew up. We had methane above the 10% explosive limit show up in these houses. Well, the state did an analysis. The state wasn't clear if it was bad well construction or poor separation between where they were producing and where the people were getting their groundwater. The company came back in with a plan to clean it up. Once they found out it was too costly, they left the state. If you go down there today, you see these 20 or 30 homes, and you can't talk to the residents there because they've all signed some kind of non-disclosure agreement and are now doing whatever they can either to haul in water or do some other method other than getting their contaminated drinking water. Next slide. Yeah. Okay, ooh, I better go real quick. Bad wells, we talked about, we know spills are a big problem. Next slide. What we don't know about this broadly is whether there's systemic problems, whether good wells are causing a problem because there's not adequate geologic separation. What we do know, are beginning to understand, is that properly operating wells are contaminating people in Colorado. Let me say that again, that properly operating wells are releasing toxic air emissions that are harming people in Colorado. Why do we know this? Well, we're getting starting together a triangle of information. We're seeing citizens anecdotally complain that they have health effects after drilling goes in, anecdotal. We're seeing Dr. Colburn from the Endocrine Disruptor Exchange say that these chemicals are found in the air at concentrations that cause problems. And the coup de grace on top of this is Lisa McKenzie and her colleague, Dr. Agate, finding higher rates of birth defects for women who live within fracking communities. Within 1 mile. Next slide. I kind of did this. I wanted to tell you a little bit about the famous scene in Gasland where Mark Markham is lighting his thing on fire. And same neighbor had confirmed that she had thermogenic gas. If you go there today, that house is boarded up and owned by the bank. And I talked about petroglyphs. Next slide. Thermogenic gas means it came from the fossil formation that the industry is seeking. It's contrasted to biogenic gas. Biogenic gas, just think bacteria working on a log underneath alluvium or something, in a floodplain. We'll spend a little bit of time on earthquakes. This is becoming a bigger issue. In 4 states now, we know that too much disposal into these Class 2 wells is triggering earthquakes. England and Ohio are now reporting maybe even the fracking wells. And of course, we had this event just, well, there's a good date. It was May 30th, though, not a couple days ago in Greeley, and it's being investigated. Next slide. Well, here's a big one I want to leave you with. Natural gas is not clean, at least not clean enough. Now, though natural gas compared to coal burning doesn't have the nitrogen oxides and sulfur oxides and mercury, it does have a problem, a big problem. That is, we leak methane to the atmosphere when natural gas is developed with fracking or any method. So much so that the promise of natural gas being a bridge fuel is a false claim. If EPA would look at the science correctly about how much global warming potential methane has over the short term, it has 125 times carbon dioxide over the 10-year period. If EPA would calculate the leak rate properly and change from its low, ridiculous 2.4% up to 10% where it actually is, we would see that natural gas is adding to the heat budget 4 to 5 times faster had we stayed on coal. This is a gangplank to nowhere. Next slide. Talked about McKenzie, and I wanted to point out here that even though we've had these independent researchers find poor health, Colorado Department of Health found similar concentrations in Platteville and concluded it was safe. In a way, both things are true. Why do you get such two conflicting things? Well, both Dr. Colburn and McKenzie are using the modern science, looking at the peer-reviewed journals about how low concentrations, especially going through the placenta, affect the unborn. Whereas the state is only looking at 20-year-old criteria from EPA, hasn't caught up with that science. Next slide. I don't think I need to spend much time on what's happening. But we have a crisis that's going to affect everyone on the planet. We're going to go. What we've seen is about a 1.5 degree Fahrenheit change. But look what's predicted. And if you leave with one point about the IPCC's predictions, remember they haven't been too good so far. They've been understating the rate of warming, particularly understating the Arctic ice melt. Next slide. We know we're going to get hotter if we keep on this path. Next slide. A big part of that is anthropogenic methane. That's true that there are termite methane, it is cow methane. Big part of it, though, is going to come from our zeal to frack all these countries, including ours, and get more methane while it leaks. Look at the rapid change in methane. Now remember this. We have focused too long on global warming potential over 100 years, which is relevant for CO2. And we've been comparing other gases over that 100-year lifetime. That's because a molecule of CO2 will last that long. Methane, however, is much shorter lived in the atmosphere. And its heat trapping ability is much higher in the beginning when it's released than over the 100 years. 6 times higher in the first 10 years. That's what the planet's actually seeing with our tapping this resource in lieu of coal. Next slide. And of course, we know, if you ever get a chance to talk to a climate skeptic, tell them that the sun couldn't be changing the ocean acidity. The ocean acidity is hugely different. It's 30% different. It's gone from 8.1 to 8.2 to 8.1 pH, which on this logarithmic scale means it's gotten much more acidic. And every time we've had an extinction in the past from natural conditions, our oceans have been acidic because of high CO2. Acidic oceans don't produce fish. We've warmed since 71. I was just myself, my wife and some friends were in Iceland looking at the drastic rate of glacial melt. Iceland, like Greenland and Antarctica, has continental glaciers. And we've seen places that had melted 50 meters vertically in 15 years. Okay, let me finish up with that report you know about. I wish we could convince farmers that it's not in their best interest to frack because warming is decreasing crop production. Last slide. Next slide. The previous one. We do have a solution. thanks to good technical work done by Mark Jacobs and his staff at the Stanford University, he's put out a really quite intriguing plan. The silver lining in all this bad news is we can have independent energy source that's clean. And we can do it by 2050, all of it. We can go 100% renewables. And here's an engineered plan. We have an engineered plan specific to each state. In our state, we have heavy emphasis on large wind. And the way this is done, you've always heard when the wind doesn't blow, when the sun doesn't shine, we can't do it. We can do it. The way these engineers are doing it is just they oversize wind and solar. Then they use either batteries or compressed air when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine. They don't use any nuclear. We have a silver lining here. We're not going to export our solar or wind power. It's ours to use. And the cost of this would actually be lower, some $7,000 per family lower. And along the way, we could eliminate $56 billion in annual costs due to asthma. We know we can get there. Engineers have a way. It's up to you, the citizens, to force your government to make us do this. Thank you.
Explain why we're wasting so much natural gas again, because we can't store it, so they understand.
Okay, Phil wants me to make this one point again. Why is the industry wasting so much natural gas? If you go online to NASA's website, there's a great satellite picture that shows western North Dakota lit up like a city. I don't know if you've ever been to western North Dakota, but there's no city there. It's lit up like a city because they're flaring off their excess gas. How many of you have heard the term redneck OPEC? The redneck OPEC was the United States capital regime, capitalists, bankers, investing in natural gas production in the United States. And in the 70s and 80s, they kept their money in their pocket when the price started going down. They withheld natural gas production to keep the price up. You realize natural gas is not shipped. All natural gas developed in the United States is burned in the United States. Well, that agreement broke apart this century. And the rapid rate of aggressive companies in this field overproduced natural gas. So the price plummeted from $13 to $3 now. That means that if you're producing gas and oil, as they do in the Niobrara wells, you might as well just burn off that gas. So you can keep your rate of return even faster by getting to the oil. And that's what's happening.
We're going to open this up to questions. Sir. Oh, and please let me just say, if you can make your questions about 10 seconds, that would be much appreciated. Oh, and, I'm sorry, there is a mic. If you would be so kind as to use the mic so we can actually have your sound recorded, we would be grateful. Thank you, Wes.
If I'm not mistaken, the Supreme Court has said that the EPA has an obligation to limit CO2 production. How can they justify burning off excess natural gas, which is turning it directly into CO2? Isn't this illegal?
Well, the illegal part, as far as how can EPA do that? EPA doesn't regulate oil and gas drilling industry. That's largely left up to the states. EPA does have a program where it's going to require green completions and some capture of some of these gases in the following year. Colorado has put that into effect just statewide just recently. So I would say EPA and the states are nibbling at this problem, just incrementally changing it. The last rules that Colorado just went through, they didn't get all the VOC and methane. They got 1/3, just 1/3 of the current production of 275,000 tons a day. And so that means new drilling will offset that. So what the court ruled in Massachusetts versus EPA is that EPA could use the Clean Air Act to regulate greenhouse gases. And EPA is choosing to do that by restricting CO2 emissions from coal plants. But it's not aggressively working on methane. And one of the reasons why is it's got the science wrong. It's got the science wrong. It does the science wrong with respect to global warming potential. It still uses a factor of 25 over 100 years. That's an easy correction. The science is robust in this regard. It was done in, reported in IPCC in November 2013. The number they should use is either 125 over 10 years or 86 over a 20-year period. How they correct the leak rate, I do not know. It's going to be a yeoman's task to actually understand a leak rate. But we have this classic conflict going on between EPA and EDF on one side, which adds up all those sources and tries to come up with a number. And NOAA, which is looking, sending up planes and putting up instruments in the tower and looking down and seeing much more. So EPA says totally it's 2.4% of production. NOAA goes out and looks in Weld County and they found 4%. They look in Utah and they found 9% of production. They look in the LA basin and they found a staggering 18%. And on top of that, we don't know what our cities are leaking. And cities leak a lot. We have wooden pipes in New York and Boston that have long since gone, and the gas is getting to the home just by going down the tunnel. We have cast iron delivery systems that are, incredibly leaky. The utilities are not motivated to correct that leak. If you're a Pacific Gas and Electric, you are allowed to charge the companies for you customers are being charged for the amount of gas they put in the line, not the amount that you get at your home. So they're not motivated.
Try and get your mind around this. Ceres, a watchdog for the industry, for renewables, did a study up in the Bakken. And their conclusion is that 30% of the gas produced in the Bakken is wasted. Now, our state statutes prohibit waste, but we produce 10 times more gas than North Dakota. So if 30% of theirs is wasted and only 3% of ours, we're equal. And in that study, they showed that the amount of gas wasted was enough to heat all the homes in Chicago and Washington, D.C. combined. So it is an extravagant waste. And the reason it's allowed is because we don't control the industry. The industry controls itself. If there's one thing you need to understand is there is no regulation of the industry. There simply isn't. They regulate themselves. We have 8 field inspectors for 58,000 wells. That well, those injection wells up there in Greeley, hadn't been inspected in 2 years. I mean, this is a disaster. It's a public disaster. A few people are getting wealthy, and we're going to pay the consequences, and our children and grandchildren are certainly going to pay the consequences.
Yes, please.
This question is somewhat rhetorical, I guess, but it's right on point here. Has there been any move to assign damages from any kind of fracking or other activities to the Superfund, which originally was put in place for such things like Love Canal? So I keep asking that question rhetorically.
Well, it's not. I mean, the industry's not subject to RCRA. They've got exemptions for everything. So they really are in their own universe. I mean, that's the long and the short of it, Wes. I mean, you can add things, but they're just not subject to regulation, except the regulations they make.
And even when EPA attempted to investigate some of these groundwater contamination possibilities, the one in Damascus, Pennsylvania, the one near Fort Worth, Texas, the one in Pavilion. The one in Pavilion, by the way, they used Superfund money to conduct their investigation. But the Obama administration dropped all 3 of those without explanation.
Bottom up, folks, bottom up.
That's the pressure, no doubt resulting from oil and gas pressure directly on the administration that they accepted. And no doubt somewhat to do with Obama pressing for additional natural gas and ignoring these facts I'm telling you about that they underestimate the leak rate and they don't establish the heat budget properly. So it's capture by both parties.
There was a very significant news development that happened yesterday. Mike, can you roll this? This is not going to have sound, but yesterday a TV report, 5-minute evening news report, which is highly unusual in the news business. This came out of Texas. Wes, if you could give the narration of what's happening.
This is a guy named Lipinski who owns maybe $10 million home in the suburbs of Texas. And he found that he had very high methane concentration in his domestic well. What, I don't know if we'll get to this or not, what this announcement just yesterday is that independent scientists have studied his well and conclusively identified that the gas in his well
I'm going to give you the website how to get to it.
Well, what's making the news is that he's got independent science showing that the specific gas in his well is the thermogenic gas from the Barnett Formation that the frackers are getting. And a part of the story that may not come across in the TV is just how much control the industry has over academia. The key scientist in this effort is Dr. Jeffrey Thine. And Dr. Jeffrey Thine had worked here at the Colorado School of Mines before he worked at the Laramie Energy Institute. In both cases, he lost his position because of opposition from the oil and gas industry to the scientific facts he was reporting.
This is the homeowner, by the way, lighting his well on fire. And this is real. This is recorded by a TV news crew.
The company involved here is Range Resources, and when Mr. Lipinski came out with the original video showing gas being lit from his domestic well, Range charged him with, help me out here, I lost the word. Defamation of character, thank you.
Yeah.
Defamation of character? Yes, like you can do to any corporation, yes. So Range filed a countersuit against him. So the news is on the specific connection between the kind of gas that's in his well and what these scientists found about that gas when they ran it through the lab. It wasn't just that it was thermogenic, it was that it was fingerprinted to the gas formation, the Barnett Formation underneath them, that they are fracking for. So it looks like either a bad well or poor geology making a connection between the production formation and this man's domestic well.
That, I think, let's stop here, but I'm just going to tell you, if you want to find this, if you do a search on the web, this is on YouTube, go to khou.com/news. khou.com/news. And the other way you can find it is the TV station itself, which is WFAA TV. W as in William and then Forest AATV. So this is in Texas. There has not been, we have not had one conclusive bit of evidence that the chemical signature, the makeup of the methane and the chemicals that were found in the well water are the same as what was located in the Barnett Shale oil and gas well. In the water well and the fracking well, the chemical signature was the same. The reason we haven't had that evidence before is because there haven't been we just don't have the testing where you've done something, for example, pre-drilling and gotten the water quality and the sampling and then after. So this is the first one, and this came out yesterday. That's where I got this from, commongreen.org. Common Green, Stream. All right, DREAMS. All right. We have time for one more question. Is there something that's pressing that someone wants to ask?
Yeah, I actually wanted to add or ask about this. It seems to me, from everything I've been picking up from talking to a lot of people, that where they're drilling is so low, so much below the aquifer, that it's fairly improbable for methane to get from a horizontal drill to the aquifer. Now, the thing I was told was it is a risk is when they're actually drilling down vertically. And that's on every kind of whether it's fracked or not, that's the risk, because they're putting a steel or a concrete casing right through the aquifer, and if something goes wrong, which it does a certain percentage of the time, then you'll get a leak. Is this what's happening, or is it really coming from the horizontal drill?
is during the time when they're drilling, when they have that open hole. And this just got confirmed in Pennsylvania by doing some overflights for methane. And they were picking up methane from new drilling, not from wells in production. EPA assumes that there's zero methane coming from a new drilled well until it comes online.
But also
So-
concrete tunneling afterwards.
Concrete.
Concrete tunneling is when the pressure from the gas manages to go
Yes,
back up
right.
through the concrete.
Right. So far, other than this petroglyph case where, in Colorado, where the methane was probably coming up through a dike, a volcanic dike that crossed both the production formation and the aquifer, we don't know of cases where it's poor geology. What we certainly know from the industry, 7% of the wells leak from the get-go, and 60% over about 30 years.
The other question I had
Wait,
was-
can you do us a favor? Can you hold your question, please, Brad? Just because we've got only a couple of minutes in, and Wes and Phil will be here, and we want to make sure that you know about 3 things that are coming up the next week that you could actually do something about. So Phil is going to make the first announcement.
First is my birthday, which is coming up pretty quick.
Oh.
No, it's not, no.
Yeah.
You know,
Brad.
there are 5 cities that have either enacted a moratorium or a ban. The 6th is on the line, and that's Loveland. And the industry is pouring tons of money in there to defeat that. The vote is going to be on June 24th. It's extremely important that we win this. We have to get the attention of the politicians that we are not going to stand for the oil and gas industry coming to our cities if we don't want them there. So do whatever you can. Give them assistance, give them money, whatever you can do, because we need to win this. We really do.
Give you
Okay,
the specifics on this. So in Loveland, there's about 2.5 weeks until this vote happens, and they're being outspent literally 40-1. Koga has already spent $400,000 to try to prevent a 2-year moratorium in Loveland. The grassroots community has $10,000, so it's going to be up to us. I mean, the help they need is to walk door to door, because that is the most effective thing in reaching voters, and then calling people. So there are 2 people who are running this campaign. One is Sharon Carlisle, who started this, who's an artist, and her phone number is 970-667-3778. 970-667-3778. The other person is Kelly Giddens, who ran the campaign in Fort Collins that won successfully for a moratorium there for 5 years. Her phone number is 970-286-7974. 970-286-7974. Every Sunday, starting tomorrow until the election, from 12 to 4, there's going to be a lit drop, and you can go into Loveland, get them. It's at 530 East 4th Street in Loveland, and there lots of people will be there and pick up the material, and then you just go door to door with a group of people. It's actually very fun to canvass, and you get to say, here's the real issue. And phoning, you can do phone banking. And Kelly or Sharon can they can email you a list. You can call from home. That's Loveland. Secondly, Tom Grover, you are here, are you not? Tom is going to speak just for 2 or 3 minutes, if you would, about what we can do in Boulder County, specifically around a home rule situation.
Yes, those of us who've been activists in Boulder County know that we get a majority of the population, sometimes 75% of the people, in favor of something, and we present it to our local county commissioners, and they apparently don't listen to us and go against our wishes. And we tried to figure out what was going on there, and we realized later on that our county government is a statutory government, which means it's a property of the state. And that even though we elect our county commissioners, they are administrators for the state. They aren't our administrators. And so they're bound to follow state rules and regulations, which means that they're not allowed to enact laws, and we're not allowed to enact laws which are more stringent than the laws that the state already has in place, and we're not allowed to ban things that the state has permitted. So we don't have a county government that can actually legally ban fracking or ban GMOs or do anything that we really want them to do that goes against what the mega corporations want to do to us. So what we have here is a little bit of legal activism that we would like your help with, all right? So I dreamed this up on my own kind of. I started a group called the Boulder County Community Rights Network, and we have a very active group now. What we're going to do is write a home rule charter for Boulder County. And that is our prerogative by law. That law has been there a very long time. And what it allows, a charter is basically a constitution. And we get to restructure government to a certain extent here in Boulder County so that we could have 5 commissioners if we wanted to. We could probably not pay them a salary if we wanted to. We could really torture them. We could have nonpartisan county-funded elections, publicly funded elections, so we wouldn't have this huge democratic machinery that's pro-fracking, pro-GMO running the government here in Boulder County. Now, the Boulder County Community Rights Network is about community rights. And we've identified the fact that we do have rights, rights that are inalienable, things that we're born with. And so because we exist, we have rights. Why would we exist if we didn't have the right to live and to grow and to prosper, and to be healthy? Why would we exist to be partially healthy? Just think it through. We have rights. These are inalienable. So what we want to do is create a local Boulder County Bill of Rights to clearly enumerate and clarify what our human rights are as a community, what our community rights are. And then based upon those rights, what we'd like to do is to outlaw these big corporate and government practices that violate our rights. And so what that does is it gives us the option of arguing on a whole different level that's really outside the box of the regulatory model of government. So we're not going to argue particles per million and things like that. We're going to argue our right to prohibit something that is inherently dangerous to our health, safety, and welfare. Rights that we've already defined and clarified in our Bill of Rights. So that's what we want to do here. Now, there's a petition process that has to go on to make this happen. And guess what? The state is supposed to, according to the Constitution of the state, clearly delineate how we're supposed to go about this, but they don't. So we've had to go through a trial and error process, doing a lot of research, and we have submitted our petition. The content and the format of our petition has been rejected twice. We've sent it in, 3 times. We've sent it in a 3rd time. And each time they wait the full 5 days before the county, election office waits the full 5 days and then working days, 1 week, and return it to us with corrections that have to be made, which are significantly vague for us to have a lot of trouble complying with their requirements. But eventually, through trial and error, we're going to have a petition. And we ask you if you could help us by signing the petition, circulate the petition, donate to our effort so we can have some funds. Because right now I've been paying for everything out of my own pocket. The other thing is that there is going to be an election. This petition will trigger an election. And it'll be on a ballot that shall we form a Boulder County Charter Commission to write a home rule charter, something to that effect. Now, you get to vote on that, yes or no. I ask you to vote yes so that we can form a commission. At the same time we vote yes, then there will be a slate of charter commissioners that will be involved in writing the charter. Now,
Tom, you know what? Can we just let people go to you for more information? And the highlight is there's an effort in Boulder County to make Boulder County a home rule county.
A home rule county
the effort.
with a Bill of Rights and prohibitions against fracking
And
GMOs.
there is the website,
Yes.
bccrn.org.
And we would like everyone here to be on the Charter Commission if possible. There'll be 21 members that will be elected at the same time that we vote whether we want a home rule charter or not. Okay?
Thank you,
We'll write the charter, it'll be voted on, we'll pass it, and we'll be home rule. There we go. Thank you.
All right, great.
Oh, we have a state amendment also that we want you to sign to give local communities the right to local self-government, which will support our efforts when it gets challenged in court.
Tom, thank you for starting this. We have, takes a lot to begin an initiative, I can say that firsthand. A lot of 3 a.m. nights. Actually, those are mornings. One more thing. So I think that our Boulder County commissioners are excellent. I think they do the right thing. A lot of the time, they voted to have a moratorium in Boulder County for 18 months. It's now coming up for renewal. That's going to be January 1st. So we're now at the point where we need to re-engage. We've had a nice period of relaxation, so to speak. The county commissioners are meeting this coming Thursday. This handout, which is excellent, the third item down says Thursday, June 12th. So we're at the point where we need to remind them that we want this moratorium to be extended. There is an email that is right here. That is oil, gas, comment, singular, at bouldercounty.org. That's oil, gas, comment at bouldercounty.org. They put this email in effect because they had 1 week, they had 1,000 emails come in, and they realized, oh my gosh, this is a serious issue. Our community cares about this. So please take 2 minutes and write them. Say by tomorrow. Make sure it gets to them by Wednesday at 4 o'clock because they meet on Thursday at 4 o'clock. And if we can have a barrage of comments that remind them, yes, we want the moratorium extended. We don't want Boulder County to become like Weld County. What happened this week, this earthquake, a 3 point whatever it was on the Richter scale, that Weld County hasn't had earthquakes like that before. That's a direct link. The epicenter for that earthquake is directly connected to the injection wells from fracking. So that's the risk that we're at in Boulder County, along with all the environmental impacts to water, to people's safety, to the damage that we're doing to the world, to our nature, to our future. So I want to thank Wes and Phil. I want to thank all of you for being here, and we're doing good work. Let's keep going.
And we want to thank you. Thank you very much.
Great.
And
thank you.
Okay.